So on this very first panel, we're going to kick it off with the business case for faith-oriented ERGs. Sumreen Ahmad is leading it from Accenture. She and I have worked together on a number of projects. She's a real leader in this space. And we've got people, they'll each introduce themselves. You can see them on the program, but just a wealth of knowledge here. Sumreen.
Thank you, Brian, and just start everything in God's name and in gratitude. So I do want to express my gratitude to Brian and anyone who's been involved in pulling this together. For someone, I think for all of us who've been doing this work for so long, this is amazing to feel like what I hope is not the tipping point. I think there's still so much work to be done, and I think for everyone in the room, thank you for being a part of it. It really is a privilege. So as Brian said, I would love for the panel to just briefly, we're going to spend just a few minutes. I have the privilege of being able to keep what could be a 3-day conversation down to 45 minutes, and so that is my job as the panelist. As the moderator. As Brian said, I work for Accenture. I'm responsible for our internal organizational culture for 500,000 people at Accenture, and a side passion job for me has been really working in the inclusion space, and in particular, faith-based inclusion, following up from everything I've learned about some of the other inclusion priorities and being able to implement that through Accenture's culture. So this panel is filled with just immense knowledge. As I was talking to the panelists before, we realized we had collective experience of over 50 years. And so without stealing their thunder, I'm going to start with Amna. And if you could just do brief introductions before we get into the actual question answer.
Sure. Thank you, Sumreen. So good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you all for coming. My name is Amna Hasnain. I'm at Texas Instruments. I've been there 12 years. And in my day job, I work in operations. So what that means for me particularly is I interpret the demand signal that's coming from our customers and making sure that we have adequate supply to meet their needs. And how I got involved in this space in D&I is because, first of all, this is a passion area for me. And Texas Instruments has 15 employee resource groups, and they all fall under an umbrella organization that we call TI Diversity Network. So I'm one of the chairs of the TI Diversity Network.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, see, I like that. Thank you. So I'm Anila Jivanji. I work for American Airlines. I've been there for about 22 years. I'm right now in the inclusion and diversity space, and I do work with organizations outside of American Airlines. So I really foster the relationships with about 38 different organizations in the inclusion and diversity space. So it's partnerships and sponsorships is what I work with. Thank you. Over to you.
Hi there. My name is Craig Carter, based out of Phoenix, Arizona. I work for Intel Corporation. Been there for about 22 years, and I'm here with about a half a dozen others. Very nice, very nice. And I've been involved in the different employee resource groups, that's what we call them, for about 21 years, my 22 years there. I lead the Christian group there. And I'm here with a bunch of other faith leaders from a lot of other different religious groups, and some of them were not able to make it, but most of them were, which is exciting. My day job, though, again, this is part-time, right? I don't get paid for that. My real job is actually I do a lot of business analytics, product line management, and then I've been involved with a lot of large financial systems, SAP implementations. I love data, I love finance stuff, and I love to charge the numbers, but I like people, which is kind of a strange combination. But, so I'm really glad to be here.
That's great. I love it. You put the technologists on the
side. Well, good morning. My name is Markee Johnson, and I am with Dell Technologies. My day job, I'm a consultant with our global sales, learning and enablement. And really what that means is amongst our 27,000 sellers around the world, we're trying to ensure that they understand our messaging, how to relate to our customers, how to evangelize what we're so passionate about, which is really enabling human progress through technology. And then for this panel, I'm so privileged to be here. I'm one of our global co-leads for Interfaith at Dell Technologies. And before I pass the mic back to Sumreen, I do just want to take a second and just say thank you again to Brian and team. There's this really beautiful quote that says, if I see further, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants. So we don't take today lightly. We don't take this opportunity lightly. We know that we are inheriting a faith legacy of people who have gone before us. At Dell, it took almost 20 years to have this faith group become a reality. So thank you for your work. You make what we do legitimate. If we can't measure it, it's not real, in the tech world anyway. So just thank you. This is such a big deal for us, and we are so humbled and honored to be here with all of you. So thank you, but thank you, Brian. This is so special. So we're fired up, just like last night, fired up at 9 a.m.
So I think to start, we have a full day ahead of us, and there's going to be lots of breakouts. The focus of this particular panel is really the business case for ERGs. And so before we can get into the tactics and the just the granularity of how to make this happen, we really need to make sure everyone understands why this is even possible. And I think for corporate America, there is a particular flavor of what's the burning platform, what is the business case for this to happen. And I think, we talked of a lot of stories and everything, so I just have some notes because I want to make sure to pick on certain people as we talk about this. But we're going to try and keep it conversational. We talked about it's not going to be kind of answer my one question. I'm sure it'll get a lot of juices flowing in the audience. I want to start with Amna. I think a lot of us are 20 years. We've been doing this work for a couple of decades. Our organizations have been. But the reality is the business cases always has to be on the forefront. And I think, Amna, I want to start with you, just given your role as a DI chair, and you see the full spectrum. What prompts the need for, and what has prompted in your experience, the faith-based business case relative to some of the other inclusion priorities?
Sure, I love that question because it sets the tone. So to answer from a Texas Instruments perspective, and I think it's applicable everywhere, I'm going to take you back about 20 years because that's when TI first started our faith-based initiatives. And first and foremost, if you think about it, religion is a key component of diversity. So we talk about racial diversity and sexual orientation. Religion is a key part of that equation. So I'd love for that to be this case alone for why we need to create faith-based initiatives, but we went one step further. So in 1999 and in 2000, we put together the case for why we should form faith-based initiatives and took that to our senior leadership. And we looked at some of the data. So for Americans, about half of Americans say that religion is a key component in their lives. They pray regularly. They turn to religious reflection when making personal big life decisions. Parents, about a third of American parents say that passing on their faith is one of the top 3 things that they want to pass on to their children. The other thing is that religious diversity is increasing in the US. So that's kind of the landscape that we're operating in back in 2000, and that still is applicable today. In 2001, 9/11 happened. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of fear and anxiety in the workplace. And I have a statistic here from Business Week back in 1999 that the EEOC reported a 29% spike since 1992 in the number of religion-based discriminatory charges. So that's the world that we were operating in. And TI said, okay, how can we help be part of that solution? And one of the things that we said is by forming faith-based initiatives. And what they do sounds simple, but I think it's so effective. They help build bridges. They break down barriers. When you have meaningful connections with people, I think it makes such a big difference. So I know we're short on time. I'm going to give a really, really quick story that I think illustrates this. So after 9/11, one of our Christian coworkers reached out to one of his Muslim coworkers and said, I don't know how you and your family are feeling right now, and if you're feeling safe, but if you feel any kind of danger, you and your family are welcome to come and live in my home for as long as you need till you can feel safe again. And I mean, even it's been more than 20 or almost 20 years, and that story to me still gives me goosebumps. Because when you know that people at your work genuinely care about you, you are going to bring 110% of yourself to work.
So Amna, it's interesting you say that because at Accenture, we've been very internal focused around that culture of trust and belonging. And so what more trust can you get when someone's willing to move you in with them? And so I think, and that's really when you untap someone's potential, human potentials, when you let them be that. Craig, I'm going to push a little bit more on this business case point around, we hear a lot about return on investment. And so in very tangible terms, Craig has this masterful, creative little acronym thing that he's got. So tell me about when you had to really pitch and promote and get buy-in. What are the 3 R's that you talk about when it comes to faith?
Oh boy, you're making me smile here. So again, I like to call myself the geek of the geeks. So I've worked in IT and computer systems and finance, accounting. I mean, if that's not geeky, I don't know what is. But basically, for everything in life, there's a cost and there's a benefit, right? I mean, there really is, if you look at it that way. And again, slightly biased towards the finance side on that. There's really 3 R's. So as a company's out there, and their job is to make money, and also to change the world in a positive way, right? There's really 3 R's. The first thing they want to do is recruit, right? They want to get the best people on board. They want to bring them in and convince these people, again, with 3.5% unemployment rate, extremely difficult to do right now to find the right people. You want to recruit the right people, bring them in. Once they get there, you want to do what? You want to retain them, right? How are you going to convince them to stay? Overseas, especially in India, we've had a lot of struggles with, they just walk down the street for literally cents more per hour or something, right? So how do you convince them to stay at your company? Retention. Quick story around that. Just recently, actually, it came up. We had a Muslim employee, new to Intel, a number of years ago. She would go out to her car every day to pray, in tears, basically feeling that she could not pray in the workplace. There's no special rooms for her. She didn't want to feel really different. So literally every day she'd pull her car out in the parking lot, go to the far end, and pray alone in her car. Until she realized, wait, there are prayer rooms. Wait, there is a Muslim employee group at Intel. Wow, eye-opener for her. So do you think she's going to stay? I bet she will, right? So retention, that's the second thing. How do you keep them at your company? And number 3, I've struggled with a good kind of word for this. It's really good teams. But ultimately that means really good teams. But also that means revenue, right? R for revenue. Again, finance here, right? It's revenue. So what company wouldn't want a high-performing team, right? Everyone talks about high-performing teams. You want high-performing teams. The foundation for a high-performing team is a foundation of trust. And if you have that foundation of trust, you can start to do wonderful things together. But if I can't bring my whole self to work, if I have to check my faith at the door, if I feel like I'm going to be discriminated against, if I'm like the Muslim woman who hides in her car, right? Do you really think she's going to be on a high-performing team? No. She can't bring her full self. I can't bring my full self. So we really need to allow that to happen. So again, the 3 R's, right? So it's how do you get them, right? How do you recruit? How do you retain? And really good teams, which equals revenue. All right, well, thank you.
Markee, we talked a couple of years ago as Dell was kind of reinvigorating and kicking back. And I know at that time you were kind of looking at some of the pushback points because it comes with any business case. And so what were some of those pushback points and how did you manage to break down some of those walls?
Absolutely. It's funny, whenever Glenda Cameron, who actually started Interfaith for us at EMC pre-Dell, when she went to bring the conversation around having a faith-based group, she got a cease and desist response. We don't do religion and politics in the workplace. And it's like, who even bucketed those 2 things together? Like, why are those? Yeah, can we clap for that? It's like, why do we put them together? 2 fundamentally different things. But I think the essence, right, there's always some underlying truth, is the reality that for many, religion has been polarizing. And for a lot of people, they've had hard experiences in their respective faith communities. So when we tout diversity and inclusion, it's, but except you. Yeah. And the reality is that if we are really going to champion this, and we have the privilege of having a phenomenal chief diversity officer at Dell Technologies, we say that diversity and inclusion is not something we do, it's who we are. It's our DNA. So if you have a faith employee where their core identity is connected to their faith, but you tell them they can't bring that, you're not going to get the best out of them. You're not going to retain them. I love those 3 R's. Absolutely going to keep it. So I think whenever we're going to pioneer, anybody in the group, are you in the midst of trying to start an interfaith group or a faith group? Okay, fantastic. Well, you're in good company. So there's a lot of mindset shift that needs to happen. And it's funny, it's not just within the broader employee group, it's within your diversity and inclusion teams. It's championing and giving a voice to the faith community. You say we're going to be inclusive, which means I need to be able to be authentic and bring my whole self. So a lot of it is understanding when people push back, it's because there's underlying pain or there's a lack of understanding. I love last night, we said, seek first to understand before you're understood. My faith background is I'm Christian, so a big part of our identity and characteristics is grace, right? We need to give grace. So we need to understand where someone's coming from, but that doesn't mean we compromise the passion and the conviction that we have. Whether you're Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, it's a part of who you are and it should be celebrated. So mindsets are one of the biggest obstacles, and it's just people's background. So you got to hear where they're coming from before you can bring them to your side of the fence. Because really diversity and inclusion is about building community, and you're not going to do that if even firm in knowing what you're saying is the right thing, if you ostracize and push people away. The other big false dichotomy that I found, and we talked about this on the call, I'm sure it's going to come up over the course of the day, is we have pride, we have LGBTQ, so we can't have faith. It's a false dichotomy, meaning these two things cannot exist in a workplace and there still be harmony and camaraderie. And we're here to share nothing could be further from the truth. Just like our LGBTQ friends need to be seen, they need to have dignity and respect in the workplace, our faith communities do as well. Right. We can coexist. And I would argue any company that can actually do both is a shining light in their industry for what good could look like, not just in your workplace, but in your communities. Mm-hmm. How do you do this well? There's this really beautiful Tibetan greeting called Tashi Delay. And what it means is, I'm honored to be in your presence and I see the greatness of God in you. Mm. How beautiful, like if we came to people in other groups with that heart and that posture of openness, how much better would our workplaces be? Mm. So whenever you go to make that argument with your diversity and inclusion group and you go to have that dialogue with your executive teams, it's championing this idea that if you want my best, you cannot separate me from my faith. And it's that stayedness and that open-heartedness that will change people's minds around what it is. So I would encourage you, when you get objections, I'm from sales, so I'm like, objections are great. It means they're listening. When you get objections, it just means that it's something to be overcome. It's not a hard no. It's a great, okay, so you say no, let me understand why. Because from my perspective, this is what it means. And our Hindu lead, whenever we launched this group, she was like, this is the first time I felt fully seen and fully known at Dell. Wow. And she's been here for years, and she stayed in a role that she doesn't love because she feels seen and known, and she contributes so much more than her day job, but she's building a community at work. Like, that's what we're championing here. So kudos to you. The barriers are good things. They're frustrating. They'll prompt you to pray. I prayed more in the last few years for work than ever before. But there's so much fruit when we listen and we come at it with, a heart to understand, hey, we can actually do this better. But just thank you for being a voice. Glenda and I, we talk about this all the time. If we don't give voice to it, no one else will. If we don't talk about dietary options in the cafeteria for our Muslim and Jewish friends, no one else will. If we don't champion not doing barbecue events during Ramadan, no one else will. So it's really important that we give voice to it.
I actually, thank you, Markee. I remember writing an article that said you can't bring your whole self to work and then cherry pick the parts that are comfortable, right? Yeah. So that's a very common kind of whole self minus that little part, and that doesn't work. So I just want to.
I had a comment, if that's okay,
sure.
Moderator.
I did too. Yeah.
At some point, she's going to put a rope around us and say, but one thing you said about you will meet people that are going to object. Don't take it personally. Understand why. We had it where a number of years ago, we sent out an email by accident to over 5,000 people on one of the events we were doing. Oops. And we had one person who objected, escalated the issue and everything. Fortunately, I was able to get this individual's name. Sat down over a cup of coffee and we started talking. She's a litigation lawyer. She could talk circles around me and way more intelligent than me. But we got into the reason of why she objected, and why that hurt her. It goes, back to her past, right? Her father forced her to do things religiously that just ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so she just went the opposite extreme, angry about all things religious. But in understanding that, we left on very wonderful terms, and as a friendship, right? So if you can take people out of the buckets of numbers and with names, right? They have names, they have feelings. There's a reason why they're objecting. It works things out really well.
So,
One more comment, and
Yes,
I'm going to shift.
I'll go really quick. Markee, you mentioned the comment about polarizing and pride and faith-based initiatives. So I had a really quick comment about that because that does come up often. And one of the stories that we recently we were talking about was we have faith-based lunches with our pride group pretty regularly. And one of the great things that we found is there's so much that we have in common. So there was a woman who wears a hijab, and she was talking to a gay individual, and they were talking about how they've been in small towns and pulling up at gas stations where there's other people that come that seem a little threatening, and how uncomfortable it makes them. And so now you have a woman who wears a hijab, who practices her Muslim faith, and a gay individual who they formed this common bond. And they developed a relationship, and this great conversations come from that. So we're not as different as people often like to make us out to be.
Oh, I'm
So I'm going to keep going because I want to make sure that I get the chance. There's some great stories coming out of American Airlines too. And I know we may not get to everything, and so I know that all of us have peers from our respective companies that we can keep the conversation going. But I will say the business case, having done this work now for 15 plus years, is that question of the business case continues to come up, whether you've been around for 20 years or not. And I think, Anila, when we were talking, there was an interesting opportunity with the merger recently,
right,
where I know that this, you have to start to pick and choose what you go and fight for. And so can you just share in terms of how that conversation, despite the Christian ERG having started 25 years ago, the conversation came back in terms of how do we use this opportunity? So whether you're brand new starting or you've been doing this for 20 years, it's never a done conversation.
you're right, it's really never a done conversation. So something very interesting happened through the merger. So it was American Airlines, which is a global company, and then merging with US Airways, which was a low-cost carrier, and it was domestic. So the mindsets that were coming together were two different mindsets. I happened to be at the crux of that at the time. And so the first thing that when they brought the employee business resource groups together, they asked us, what do you think we should do first? And the first thing that came to my mind is we need to look after the people first. Because the people are then going to merge the processes. The people then are going to merge the systems. And they're going to work on the policies and procedures together. So basically what I was given at the time, and at that time, I was working with the employee business resource groups. So the first thing was to understand what is most important to the people that are going to be driving the change. And I think the first thing was, I need to know that I'm going to be okay and taken care of.
Yeah.
But not just as a skilled employee, but as a person.
That's good.
Right? And so the first thing that we did, and I remember this project, the first project was to align the systems together. So we had a room full of 60 skilled employees from four or five different business units. And the first thing that we did is we introduced having a prayer room very next to the conference room. Now I want you to go back 7 years ago. That is when the merger really started. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to know, we wanted to make sure that those people that are starting this very, very important work, because we are going to be touching every part of the globe, because every person that is making a reservation is coming from a different part of the country or different part of the world. When we were merging those systems, we didn't want to lose even one reservation. Think about how important that is, right?
Very important.
And so the first thing that everybody wanted to do was pray, because the minute we kind of flipped the switch for the merge, things were flowing. Now think about this. In the same room, we had a Muslim praying on the knees. We had a Christian person on the knees. We had a Hindu person literally lighting a lamp. And all of it was surreal. I could not believe this was happening in our workplace. But before that switch went on, we had a Buddhist monk come and do all of the bowls, the singing bowls. It was amazing because it created a whole different kind of an environment. So at that merger, we started realizing that the first thing that we really need to start to focus on is our religious groups. We know that the women's group is doing a really awesome job, and we know that the pride group is doing a really great job. But what is most important to the people is what is lying in the heart, and how do we make sure that the heart is alive. And that's how we kind of brought all of the religious groups up together, and we kind of created one harmonious bylaws and a structure and all of it. And now, when the pride group is sitting with the Christian group or the Muslim group, they know exactly what the role of a secretary is. You know, and so we kind of harmonized it, and that was a really, really great opportunity for us.
Did anyone else get chills? I think for those of us that work in technology, a major cutover like that is no joke. And I think the fact that you formalized the action, we're all praying anyway, right? The fact that you actually did it, I mean, that's a very powerful example of how it really comes to light. Thank you. I want to keep going. Just, you know, anytime you do, one of the things that I'm very sensitive to is you can put all the structures and stuff in place, but if you're not getting to the heart of it, it's key. The other part of driving a very sustainable change is just competing for mind share. I mean, how many of our business executives are bombarded with, but we need this and we need this and we need this. And so, you know, one of the best practices that feels very obvious is to not operate in a silo. And so I want to just kind of touch on the area of when starting and then continuing down this journey, that organizational alignment. I think there's a lot of goodness when you can hook onto something existing. And so I'm going to actually go to Craig, and I just kind of understand that the faith community has its own need, right, in terms of we want to make sure to create the affinity for why the faith ERGs are being created. But at the same time, we're trying to balance that alignment with how this actually applies to the broader for-profit businesses that we all work for. So Craig, I know that you've had experience in this in terms of trying to calibrate that in your organization, and is there something you want to help bring that to life?
Sure, I could tell lots of stories, but I'll try to be a little better on time this time. There's a couple of things. A lot of companies, the first thing they come out is metrics. I want to know metrics. I want to know the number of people involved. I want to know who's involved. I want to know where they're involved. I want to know the genders, right? I want to know the different ethnic backgrounds. But I found over the couple decades of doing this, that need to get you 10% of the way to the goal. The other 90% is the stories, right? And pulling these executives in. Do they kick off your events? Invite them. Ask them to stay, right? Pull them in. Tell them the story about how this employee felt after this occurred. Like I told that story about the Muslim lady, right? And stuff. Do you think that resonates with our senior executives? Absolutely. That changes things, right? It goes beyond the numbers, right? Again, like what you said, none of us want to be a number, right? Oh, we need to hire 5 more of this type of person. Really? Ouch, that hurts. I want them to look at my heart, right? They should hire me because of what's inside and allow that what's inside to come out, actually. So that's kind of some thoughts on that.
The partnering. And I think, Amna, from your vantage point in terms of having that D&I perspective, maybe just talk about some of the programming that has allowed for that what we call now, I mean, that intersection with some of the other inclusion priorities. We've touched on it a little bit, but you know, how have you been able to successfully not just put this on the front burner, but also make sure that it's hooked in nicely with all the other D&I for the purposes of long-term sustainability?
Sure, yeah, so we have had, thankfully, many events, but I'm going to pick my favorite one that we've had recently, which was an interfaith series that we had. So we invited not just the people from the faith-based initiatives, but people from all the diversity employee resource groups that we have and executives. And we started with a 3-part series. The first portion of it was having faith leaders, so a rabbi, I know it sounds like I'm starting a joke or anything, but a rabbi and a priest and an imam come to TI and just have a very open dialogue. It was a safe space for people to ask questions, and it was just so interesting hearing the questions that people had, just so they could learn more. Yeah. And then the even better part that I thought was after that, we went to each place of worship. So we went to a church, we went to a mosque, and we went to a synagogue. And there were some great conversations, that happened there. And the one of the takeaways that happened is at the church, one of the imams was with us, and he was asking questions and talking about how service is such a big piece of the Christianity faith, and talking about that, and what do you do, and how can we partner together. And out of that came a program that they started doing with some of the local schools, where people from both faiths came together and started doing humanitarian work. So we really just a legacy formed after that. So there's been a lot of great examples of having faith-based initiatives really intermingle with the rest of the employee resource groups to help promote a lot of understanding and connections.
Yeah, and I actually think that tied to volunteerism and corporate citizenship. But my sense is that if we were to do some analytics around that, a large community of people working in the volunteerism and corporate citizenship probably are coming from some of these faith groups. And that's an important correlation because it's what drives them. The Abraham's tent, I think, Anila, you had some, I think this idea of fostering dialogue where it might not otherwise happen also is an important one. So you've got some good examples here.
Yeah, so what we call is an Abraham's tent that happens on a quarterly basis. And that's where the Abrahamic faiths come together. So the Christian, the Muslim, and the Jewish group. They collectively come up with 4 topics through the year. So this conversation happens once every quarter. Controversial topics like the place of women in the family, right? Now think about the topic itself. It's not only intersectional between the 3 faith-based groups, but when you're talking about the place of women, who else do you think is interested in this conversation?
Your women's groups.
Yeah.
What about the families, right? And so those are one of our 2 largest employee business resource groups. When that topic was published, it was standing room only, right? But think about how much further that conversation went. It was not just during those 45 minutes, because then what the women's group did is they used that as a base, and then they started talking about the place of women in the workplace. And then the family matters took that to even one step further, is life balance. And it's all that. So this is what the Abraham's tent started doing. And it has become such a coveted event that now we have to start publishing it ahead of time. So in March, what we're going to do is we're going to bring in our executive sponsors. And what does that conversation look like at the executive level? What we're really trying to show is that the conversation is not different, whether you're in the operations as a gate agent or whether you are an executive that is running a $1 billion business unit. And that is what we want to do, is create a level of universal conversation. And the Abraham's tent is nothing better than really saying that we work for the same company and we are the same people. I put on my pants the same way like you do.
Yeah. Right, Markee, I think this is a very important way of demonstrating how it really is. Any examples from your organization?
We actually had the privilege, so when you're trying to do something cross-faith groups, you want to find a topic that, regardless of your faith background, you can get on board with, and we can have a unified vision for how to go make a change. So as an interfaith group, we decided to take on human trafficking as a global community impact topic. Because regardless of your faith background, human trafficking isn't a respecter of persons, geography, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic background. It impacts all of us in our cities, our countries. So it gained so much traction within our interfaith community that our whole D&I team took it on. So it brought together for the first time ever 13 different employee resource groups with different missions, different communities, united under one front to say, we will stand for the freedom of those who cannot stand for themselves. So this was a global event that we did last year in October. It was a one-day event around the world. We had a live event in Bangalore, India, Cork, Ireland, and Austin, Texas, where we had trafficking survivors share their story. We had people on the front lines give a voice to this, and it brought such a spirit of unity with our employees that most people didn't know it was occurring in their city. It's easy, especially as Americans, to assume it happens somewhere else. But you get that phenomenon. We heard that feedback from people in Taiwan, in the UK. I can't believe this happens here. but it was such a spirit of unity. And now we're actually answering an RFP for a global anti-human trafficking organization to help them solve some of their biggest data needs. We can clap for that. It's so exciting. So like this is a part of building the business case for ERGs. Whenever you get into your communities and you understand what are the needs here, where can we build community as employee groups, and then champion the things that we're passionate about. It was all birthed out of a passion that we had as a leadership team, and then the cause caught fire. So I don't know what it will be for your companies, but try to find a cause that you can hitch yourself to. And then you'd be surprised the turnout. We had over 1,700 employees take part in it. It was epic. We're doing it again this year. If y'all want to be involved, let us know, because it's something that's so crucial. But finding those causes really helps, because then it's not, hey, we're interfaith, so we're going to talk about prayer. We're not going to fit all of their, not that prayer isn't crucial, so please hear me. But people stereotype what interfaith should and shouldn't be. It's like, don't tell us who we should be when we grow up. We're figuring that out for ourselves. And so getting to champion these causes, we're the newest ERG within our community, so it took us from this niche kind of, if faith's your thing, then like go to interfaith, to wow, they're actually really thinking outside of the box, and they're thinking about connecting to the business imperative, connecting to other ERG groups. So we solved a problem for D&I. It was just a win across the board. Yeah.
You want to follow that one?
I'd like to follow up on that. So how do you think outside the box and stuff? Keep your eyes open. Just keep your eyes open. Two quick stories. I'll try to make it quick here. Is one, a number of years ago, Intel started offering Martin Luther King Day as a holiday. It was after that first time that it was offered about 5 years ago. I realized I really didn't know a lot about Martin Luther King. So I went on Amazon and typed Martin Luther King book. Great way to do research. It's not, right? Don't do that. But basically the first book that came up, he had written, basically where he selected, against his will I found out in reading the prologue, about a dozen or so different sermons and speeches that he had written. And so in reading through that, I was amazed. Wow. Our company needs to hear this. So again, partnering with other employee resource groups, bringing them together. Now we've had the 4th year of where we have one of his speeches that's read by about 6 different people. Again, you go down, they look different, they are different races, around the country, different countries, and it's beautiful. Because why? And we looked outside the box to really help bring diversity and inclusion together. And the first year this happened, we got a couple of negative comments, again, about 1% or so, but some of them were like, why are you can see what I look like, why are you leading a Martin Luther King effort that's inappropriate? Ouch, right? I got a little work to do here, right? And so it just opened up some wonderful doors, just wonderful doors.
No, it's great. When you start peeling back the onion and you realize that, subconsciously, this is actually, not even subconsciously, when we started doing things like mental wellness, and a huge focus area in corporate America right now in terms of mental wellness, you start to peel back some of the stigma that comes from a faith lens. Those conversations can get really deep. And I think one of the things Brian and I were talking about is this wave that we're seeing, a lot of us feel marginalized. And so when you can bring everyone together and make, there's that community that goes, I want to shift gears and honor the remaining moments we have left, but really talk about impacts that we've achieved and really how this has been a game changer or a differentiator. And I'm going to pick on Anila, because when we were talking, I was just fascinated being a customer, right? And so when you look at it from outside looking in, for customers, partners, other stakeholders, how has this really helped you be a better company, kind of on the marketing, promotional side of things?
So we're going to talk about the uniforms.
I love that story. There's a whole bunch of really great stories. For anyone who's flown American Airlines, who knew?
Yes. So, uniforms, when we instituted the new design, it created a little bit of a havoc.
Oh, wow.
People were allergic to things, and they didn't like the standards that were used to manufacture them, and it's a whole lot of things. So we had to go back to the drawing board. This was our opportunity when we went back to the drawing board to become a very inclusive designer. What we started doing is okay, so you design clothes for men, you design clothes for women, you design clothes for everybody. What about clothes for people that are going through transition? What about clothes for people, for women that are going to be pregnant? What about clothes for people that come from the religious backgrounds? And so we called it the Modesty Collection. That was all inclusive. Did it say that this was for Jewish or Muslim groups? No, because it says the modesty collection, right? What it also started doing is when the employees started wearing that in the front line, it kind of opened up a conversation, because now we've got a gate agent or a ramp agent wearing a hijab or a tunic. What happens to that customer during Ramadan that comes and says, I need to go and pray? So they're going to be very easily go to the person that has the hijab and say, can you please help me get an aisle seat so that I can go and pray? And then they go to the flight and they see a flight attendant with the hijab. Now it's going to be easy conversation. So that, we started with building the trust is so important. So building the trust within the employees is important, but building the trust with the customer is equally important for us. Just the mere fact of the optics, the visual optics of having someone in a modesty collection has created this trust. Once you trust a company or a brand, are you going to move away from it? We're one up right now with Delta and United.
Ahmad, you have Texas In the spirit of transparency, I flew here on Delta, but
well, they don't have the modesty collection.
yeah, no. Very true. And things to pay attention to, So, Texas Instruments, we're about to close. Yep, we are last. Final word. Texas Instruments, I feel like, has had some really good traction in this space. And so how's it been a differentiator for TI?
Sure. I have like 5 stories, but I'm gonna keep them short. I'm gonna do one about solving problems, and then I'll do one that speaks from the heart. So regarding solving problems, we had a story recently where one of our Christian employees was talking to me about a technical problem that he was solving. And I'm not an engineer, so I won't be able to tell you exactly what the technical problem it was. But they were stuck. They didn't know how to move forward. And so he realized that he could reach out to one of his Jewish friends who worked in a completely different department, was a completely different type of engineer, but he thought his creativity and skill set might be able to help solve this problem. So he brought him over, and because they were friends, that person left what he was doing and came over to spend time with this other individual. And together they came together and they actually solved that problem. So that's a real business impact. Because they were friends through faith-based initiatives, they were able to solve a problem that TI was experiencing. The other that I'm going to say is more from the heart, and Ellen, if you were here for last night's dinner, she touched on this a little bit yesterday, but back in, I think it was 2017, Dallas had mass shootings where several police officers were gunned down. And also during that same time period, we looked about 6 months prior to that, around the world, there were so many tragedies due to mass shootings. And I think that just our company, our people were grieving. And so we wanted to do something, we didn't know what. And frankly, I was a little nervous about how do we bring this together? It's grief and we're a corporation. How are we gonna pull this off? But what we did is we had each one of our employee resource groups come up on stage and they read the names of the people who had fallen. And then we held hands, had a moment of silence, and then we had a Jewish prayer, a Muslim prayer, and a Christian prayer. And our CEO also came and spoke a few words. I have to tell you that event was one of the events that we've had the most positive feedback on. There were people who literally had tears in the audience, and they felt like this was really needed. We really needed that. And it brought people together, and it gave them a space to grieve together.
What a great note. I too don't want to end this conversation, but what a great way to end it. I think thank you for your emotional intelligence for navigating this journey. It is challenging. So we talk about business case. That continuous meeting people where they're at is a skill that cannot be underestimated. And your passion and commitment. And I think we're around all day today. For all of you, I feel like as you encounter your own challenges and kickstarting and maintaining momentum, do that sharing. This is, it's not that big of a community, and I think we're all collectively moving the needle together. So I look forward to the conversations for the rest of the day, and to all 4 companies that were represented here. Thank you and your leadership for taking this on.
Thank you.
Thank you.